With patch 2.4, they're expanding some key rune words into spear bases, the most interesting to me being Infinity, since as many of you know, I love playing the self-equipped Infinity Sorceress, so the inclusion of an Infinity Amazon to the roster is fairly tempting. So we took it for a spin over on Twitch just to see how it compares to builds like the Lightning Fury Amazon and the more modern Fendazon. And needless to say, it's actually fairly competitive with them and relaxing to play, generally being better against bosses and weaker against crowds than the Javazon. Though as you can tell, Lightning Strike, despite not being on par with Lightning Fury for crowd killing in areas like cows, it does tend to do fairly well whenever it comes to dealing with a wider variety of enemies, especially whenever it spans beyond what you'd normally reach with Conviction. For the test, I generally favored speed, but if you're willing to drop a frame or two on your attack, you can actually bump up the per strike damage a decent amount, though there is definitely a diminishing return to it, and generally I prefer faster strikes whenever possible. As far as how the build you're seeing in the background is set up, it's actually fairly simple. Much like the other melee Spearzons we've done, enough strength and dexterity for gear as usual, and the rest into vitality. Since we can't use a shield with a proper spear, we're going to be relying on our natural tankiness and our evasion skills to avoid getting popped too hard. On the Mercenary, I'll admit I just wanted to try out the Frenzy Barbarian, and I have plans for Dual Grief on another character, so instead we went with Dual Plague, with the hopes of triggering that lower resist proc a bit more often. And honestly, with the two of them, it actually worked out fairly well, despite them being mismatched versions of it. And the high level cleansing worked wonders whenever we went through the poison thick areas of the game, and the damage on them is honestly not half bad either, thanks to the Deadly Strike giving the swings a little bit of a bump. As far as the rest of this stuff, it's standard Fortitude and Vampire's Gaze I just throw on for survival gear, it's nothing too special. As far as our skills, since the focus is Infinity, we're of course going to focus on Lightning, since we not only have Conviction, but also a massive penalty to enemy Lightning resists for helping floor those enemy resists down as close to negative 100% as possible. So we went to 20 Charge Strike for our boss killing skill, since we can stack all 10 bolts on a single act boss, or even most of them on larger enemies outside of that, and we went with Lightning Strike for the crowd control, since even though it doesn't overlap as much as Fury, the amount of bounces it gives can wreck decently sized crowds. Beyond that, we grabbed a good chunk of the passive tree, getting each of our avoid skills up to around 50% effectiveness. Since we don't have a shield, this is our next best bet. With the changes to how these skills work, they're actually far more user-friendly than they used to be. As far as leftover points, I went ahead and got Pierce and dumped the rest into Lightning Fury as a just-in-case for the stream. But due to how this build felt, I would probably say put those extra points into Valkyrie to make your tanky companion even tankier, since we didn't end up having to pull out the Pocket Fury even once during testing. Equipment-wise, we obviously are going with the Infinity Spear, in this case in a man catcher to maximize our speed. We could have gone with an Amazon class spear as well for a little bit more damage, though do note they are slower, so you'll need to be on top of your faster attack speed game to hit reasonable frames with them. Reason speed is somewhat important here is most of our damage is weapon independent, only having enough physical damage to keep our mana via leech elsewhere. Things like Crushing Blow and Lightning Piercing for all of our skills are going to contribute to most of our damage, so faster is going to be better. To get the attack speed to max out our spear, we started with some of the usual suspects, like Laying of Hands for increased attack speed, and the damage to demons helps a bit too, though do remember it only impacts our physical damage in the end. Similarly, High Lord's Wrath for even more speed, and again the Deadly Strike helps out our physical damage a bit, bringing that up to at least a semi-reasonable level to keep us from being truly mono-elemental. The last big thing for attack speed is actually Andariel's Visage, which works on a few fronts, but mostly because we put an attack speed jewel in it, we reached the final breakpoint with this particular spear. Though Visage also has a slew of other nice mods like Life Leech, plus all skills, Poison Nova, Strength for gear, etc. I am also kind of guilty of wanting to use it because it's almost always just another mercenary helmet for people, and I kind of wanted to use it in a build, and this one was a pretty good one because we did need that attack speed. Now, to counteract the loss of fire resist, you could put a Rahl in the Visage, but then you wouldn't hit the breakpoint, so we went with Inferno Stride instead on the boots. Though due to some of the other gear we have, this is kind of superfluous, but I felt it important to keep on the build's guide just in case you didn't have other sources of fire resist just yet. To remind you, it's a solid boot choice. It's actually really good. If I had to choose one that didn't support resist, I would probably go with Gore Riders just to get more Crushing Blow, which would help with 2 or 3 shot the bosses even easier. On the rings, we went standard melee fare, Ravenfrost to keep from getting chilled, since that lets us keep our attack speed up more easily, which, as we've said, is pretty important to this build, and we also have the dual leech ring to keep our mana topped off and give us a bit more life leech. Though we don't really need the life leech, the mana leech resistance stats are far more important here for this particular build. You do want at least one source of mana leech for it. On the belt, we're using Thunder God's Vigor, T-God, since, well, I've been on a Gloam kick lately because of bad luck, and this actually does help out a ton. You may have noticed my light and resist weren't maxed earlier, but that's because I'm transferring my resist charms around between characters for testing, but I'm using this to also keep my inaction resist on that end, if I am using those charms, above 85%, and with the absorb just covering the last of the gap to keep us alive. And finally, armor-wise, I went with Chains of Honor for resist and plus skills. You could go Enigma for teleport, Treachery for attack speed to free up your helmet so you could wear, say, like Griffins if you want, though you do lose skill points for that, which can kind of suck. You could even go as low as Twitch Throw or Stealth if you're doing a super budget version of the build, which, might I add, was already a viable build before 2.4, especially for Normal and Nightmare. It's just Infinity makes it more competitive with the throwing Javazon variant. Overall, I enjoyed trying it. It may not be up to par with the Lightning Javazon, but it is fun and competent. And it's just nice to have alternative builds to mess around with that play a bit differently, even if they're only about 90% of the power of a real meta build. And as always, if you found this video or any of the other dozens of build videos we've done, give this video a like and leave a comment about what kind of passion project builds you have down below.